In 2022, the Republic of Mali stood up against French military occupation and became the first country in recent years to send France's troops packing. Then, in 2023, Burkina Faso made similar moves, followed by Niger. But another country did this before those three members of the Alliance of Sahel states. In 2021, France suspended its military occupation of the Central African Republic, accusing the country's military of getting too friendly with Russia. French troops finally quit its soil in 2022. The Central African Republic is a landlocked country located in the heart of Africa, just north of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The country is almost unheard of in the English-speaking media, but like its neighbor to the south, mineral resources coveted worldwide can be found underfoot. Think copper, diamond, gold, graphite, ilmenite, iron ore, kaolin, kyanite, lignite, limestone, manganese, monazite, quartz, rutile, salt, tin, and uranium. As you can imagine, France and other Western powers have taken quite an interest in the Central African Republic over the years. To find one of the clearest examples of how France has been long salivating over the Central African Republic's resources, we need to go back to 1977. That was the year Jean-Bédel Bokassa declared himself emperor of the landlocked country and organized an elaborate and expensive coronation to honor his reign. The ceremony cost roughly $22 million, the equivalent of roughly $117 million today. This was a quarter of the Central African Republic's annual budget at the time, but France paid for most of the ceremony. France's interests in the arrangement were crystal clear. In his book, Dark Age, The Political Odyssey of Emperor Bokassa, historian Brian Titley describes former French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing's relationship with the Central African ruler, who asked people to call him Papa Bok.
The strategic mineral uranium kept France friendly and allowed mutual interest between the president for life Bokassa and the French President Giscard family to be cultivated.
However, uranium was not the only resource France was after. Dr. Titley also writes,
confiscations, kickbacks, and direct involvement in the smuggling of diamonds to the world's markets. These were the means by which Papa Bok enriched himself from the country's most valuable resource.
And
a trading monopoly was then granted to a consortium made up of 4 foreign companies, one each from the United States, France, the Netherlands, and Israel.
However, the promise of resources alone was not enough for France to fund the royal coronation. France wanted exclusivity. They wanted to eliminate competing influences. So for this, Bokassa would have to promise to sever ties with Libya's Muammar Gaddafi. The Central African Empire collapsed after under 3 years in 1979, after the French believed he was building a relationship with Gaddafi after all. Opération Cabane, led by the French secret intelligence agency Service de Documentation Extérieure et de Contre-Espionnage, killed Bokassa, putting an end to his empire and leading the country to become a republic once again. 10 years after the fall of Bokassa, France continued to exploit the Central African Republic for medical research. French scientists launched the Opération Bangui to secretly inject Central Africans with experimental vaccines for AIDS research. But, as in the past, the biggest benefit France has derived is by controlling natural resources and blocking their competition. A leaked cable from 2009 called Growing Chinese Influence in the CAR Evident was sent out by the U.S. Embassy in Bangui after President François Bozizé took over decades after Papa Bok. It states,
with French investments moribund and French influence in general decline, the Chinese are likely positioning themselves as the Central African Republic's primary benefactor in exchange for access to the CAR's ample deposits of uranium, gold, iron, diamonds, and possibly oil.
The U.S. makes it clear that their concern is not just with the waning French influence, but with the Western Bloc as a whole. Referring to the president of the country at the time, the cable states,
President Bozizé may increasingly embrace the Chinese as an alternative to the French and other Western benefactors.
Notably, the cable continues,
a Chinese company has purchased a significant part of the French uranium company Ariva's interest in Central African mines.
Ariva is the same company that notoriously exploited Niger. It had an interest in the Central African Republic between 2007 and 2012. In 2007, the French company purchased the country's Bokassa mine, among mines elsewhere in Africa, for $2.5 billion from Canadian company Uranium. Yet, it was not until late 2015 that the public would learn just how awful the relationship between Ariva and the Central African Republic was. In December of that year, WikiLeaks published several documents showing that Ariva failed to protect its African employees from extreme levels of radiation, up to 30 times the natural amount of radioactivity, as they touched the harmful substances with their bare hands. Furthermore, Ariva's time in the country was marked by illegal kickbacks and corruption scandals involving the purchase of 3 mines. WikiLeaks describes this period as
corrupt multi-billion-dollar war by Western and Chinese companies grab uranium and other mining rights in the Central African Republic and escape paying for the environmental consequences.
The latter part holds true, as when Ariva pulled out in 2012, they left behind a toxic mess of nuclear contamination. However, this would not be the final nail in the coffin between France and the Central African Republic. That would only come with the failure that was Opération Sangaris, France's 7th military intervention in this African country, lasting from 2013 to 2016. The Central African Republic's shifting geopolitical alignments corresponded with the beginning of a civil war that would cause the country to descend into bloodshed and near collapse. Bands of rebels organized under a coalition known as the Seleka took control of many towns in 2012, seizing control of Bangui in 2013. Against the backdrop of an extensive history of French military intervention, former President François Bozizé turned to the military forces he was familiar with, the French Army, the French Air Force, and the French Gendarmerie, or military reserves. However, the French military did not protect Bozizé, who Seleka rebels overthrew in 2013. In a speech given on 27 December 2012, Bozizé stated,
"What mistake did I make? There are no political prisoners at the moment. The press is free. Why did they start raping, killing, and hating the Central African population? We gave them everything. Before giving oil to the Chinese, I met Total Energies in Paris and told them to take the oil. Nothing happened. I gave oil to the Chinese and it became a problem."
Bozizé went on to form a rebel coalition, the Anti-Balaka, who have fought the Seleka at whatever cost ever since, often with little regard for the well-being of civilians. France's Opération Sangaris intervened on 5 December 2013, allegedly to help put an end to the violence. But this nearly 3-year military occupation is infamous for French troops' violence. A shocking 2015 UN report revealed French soldiers sexually abused children, including raping boys between the age of 9 and 11 and forcing 98 girls as young as 12 to have sex with animals for money. According to the popular Cameroon-based news site Afrique Media, French troops were also accused of trading arms for diamonds with the rebels. By 2017, another Central African president, Faustin Archange Touadéra, began to favor Russian partnership, leading to a fallout with France. And much like in the Alliance of Sahel states, Central Africans have taken to the streets on numerous occasions to laud the French departure and support their country allying with Russia. And since then, everyone has lived happily ever after. Wait, what's that? Okay, not so fast. It turns out that France and the United States do not approve of the Russia-Central African partnership. Who would have thought? As France's troops were packing up in 2021, a French spy named Juan Remy Kingolo was arrested for possessing significant amounts of ammunition and weapons and for maintaining alleged links to armed groups. However, before his trial, he contacted a doctor at the French embassy, claiming that he needed medical support for a supposed kidney failure. He was swiftly flown to France, evading justice. In April 2024, a phone conversation between the Central African opposition leader Paul Crescent Beninga and U.S. Embassy diplomat Pedro Campo Bue was leaked on the internet. During the call, Beninga reported back to Campo Bue regarding an anti-government mobilization. Campo Bue gave Beninga the direction to organize another mobilization, to which Beninga stated he was ready to mobilize 10,000 people for $12 million. This caused a huge scandal across Central African media regarding the U.S. Embassy's funding of anti-government protests. The embassy statement denied the accusations. On 26 May 2024, an alleged U.S. spy was detained after found allegedly engaging in illegal and destabilizing activities in the Central African town of Zemio. Belgian citizen Martin Joseph Figuera was working for a USAID-funded NGO called FHI 360. Based on information found on his confiscated cell phone, Figuera spent his time working with rebel leaders and inciting them to violence. He even recruited new members on their behalf and gave them financial support. In one leaked message, a rebel leader wrote to Figuera of his attack on Central African soldiers, upon which Figuera thanked the rebel for the update and asked for photos of the slain military men. In addition to this, Figuera spent his time encouraging Central African civilians to turn against the government and to organize revolts. On 10 June 2024, two French citizens, Ben Salam and Ousmane Samir Antonio, were arrested in Bangui and held for investigation. Upon searching their home, authorities found a huge stash of illegal weapons, including several units of assault rifles, pistols, and grenades, as well as tens of millions of CFA franc, passports from various countries, and military uniforms. And these are just a handful of the known examples of foreign destabilizing actors in the country. It is no wonder that on 17 June of that year, Central Africans took to the streets of Bangui to demonstrate against illegal spies and mercenaries working covertly in their country. So what does this mean for the future of the Central African Republic? On the one hand, 2024 concluded with a meeting in Ouagadougou between the Central African Republic's Touadéra and Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré, perhaps a sign that the country may strengthen its ties with the Alliance of Sahel states. On the other hand, France has been trying to restore its ties with the Central African Republic. Touadéra met with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris in April 2024 and agreed to work towards a, quote, constructive partnership. A French delegation came to Bangui in July to reinstate financial support or budgetary aid for the country. However, by August of that year, France has suspended such aid, claiming that the country was embroiled in an anti-French propaganda campaign. Despite the scandals, by January 2025, French and Central African defense officials met in Bangui to discuss re-establishing military cooperation between the two countries. What do you anticipate is coming next? Let us know in the comments.